Parsha Shemini it's a real interesting portion because we're talking about the consecration of the priesthood, but right in the middle of all this stuff about being obedient to what Yahweh is saying, making sure you're bringing the right fire, making sure the right people are doing it, that the priests are doing their jobs. We've got this little interruption in here that starts talking about food. What in the world is this doing here? And when I was thinking about it, it's very fitting that this kind of falls in the time of Pesach this year, because during unleavened bread, what's the point of unleavened bread? You're discerning the things that you're eating. You're taking a look at it. You are making sure there's no leaven. You're making sure that it's not in there. And that's what the Father is asking us to do in really everything in our lives, that we spiritually discern what we are allowing to come into us, but He wants us to make sure we're doing this in the physical as well. So there's some things that we learn in this. And there is a point, okay? I mean, does He really care? Well, He obviously does, because He told us about it, okay? So what is the point of it all? And the point of it, throughout all of the book of Leviticus, there's one major emphasis. Be holy. Be holy. Because He said He is holy and He wants His people to be holy. And so that affects how we live. That affects how we do things day to day. It's not like the one thing once a year that you do that defines who you are. It's the things that you do daily that define who you are. And what Yahweh is telling us to do is daily examine ourselves, examine our lives, and be careful of these things. So it's not just during unleavened bread, okay, do this. But if we're not living it the rest of the year and doing what He's saying the rest of the year, I mean, what's the point? Are we just trying to go through the motions, or do we really want to do it? See, so there's a difference in that. So it's got a lot to cover today. So I hope you guys are ready for it. I know a lot of this we've heard before. Some of it you may have not. But regardless, always good to get a refresher course, isn't it? Much like unleavened bread, during the time, don't eat yeast, don't do this. Even the medical professionals say it's good to do a yeast cleanse, right? It's good to get rid of the things that are in there. So the Father is trying to teach us how to do that. So let's jump into a few things. Leviticus 9:1 starts off, on the 8th day, Moshe called Aaron and his sons and the elders of Israel. Why? Why does he call them on the 8th day? What's happening on the 8th day? Well, the 8th comes after what? Yeah, you guys know the answer to this. It comes after 7, right? So the 8th day, it's after a completion. 8 is a new cycle, a new beginning, because you go, 1 through 7, and then instead of going back to 1, it's 8. So you're not just laying another foundation, you're building upon it and going on. So each cycle that you go through something, you're going to build on what came before, much like the Moedim, much like the days, months, and years of your life. You go through cycles, and each time you come back around, you're building on what you've already had there before. And that's what the Father's asking us to do. Okay? Now for the priesthood, they had a cycle of 7 days for the purification to be consecrated and set apart. And on the 8th day, they're being put into service. Okay? Now consider this as well, that they had a time of being set aside just to learn what they had to do. Right? And then they have to actually go and do it. So the consecration of being set aside, it wasn't just for the priesthood that was consecrated for the 8-day period. What else was set aside and consecrated for the 8-day period? The altar. There's a connection, isn't there? Because the priesthood dealt mainly with what? The altar. When you brought the offerings, they had to come and bring it forward and put it up there. Okay? You couldn't go up to the altar and put it on. You gave it to the priest, and he did that. So they had to be set apart. They had to learn what their function was. They had to learn how to properly do the things that was set before them so that they could do it the right way. And that's what the Father's asking us as well, that we learn the right way to do things. Okay? All right. So on the 8th day, we learn. It takes a process to produce fruit. And that's kind of the point that we're looking at here. They had the time to learn, and then there was the time to do. Right? Now, what about in our lives? Do we see it the same way? Do we do the same things? There is a time to prepare, and there's a time to be prepared. You know the difference? See, there's a time to get ready. There's a time to do things in your life. There's a time to set up the foundation, to do things, to build, to learn, and to prune, and to do all these things. And then there's a time when you better already have it done so you can do it, because you don't have the time to prepare anymore. Now's the time to take action, right? So same thing with us. The Father is teaching us now. So it's a time for us to prepare our hearts, prepare our lives, because we're going to have to learn to walk it. Okay? So there's a process to produce fruit. We learn in Luke 6:39 and 40, it says, he also said a parable, can a blind man lead a blind man? Will they not both fall into a pit? A disciple is not above his teacher, but everyone when he is fully trained will be like his teacher. I'm sorry, I can't help it. Here's the point. We have to learn to follow. We have to learn what the Father is telling us. We have to learn how to apply things to our life daily. And what Yeshua is saying is, you wouldn't go in and try to learn from somebody who just heard it on YouTube this morning, would you? Let that sink in for a minute. You know, would you trust your car? Hey, are you a mechanic? No, but, I learned about it on YouTube this morning. And you know what? I know we all use YouTube. There's nothing wrong with that, okay? Because if it helps you learn, it's a good tool. But you can't call yourself a mechanic if you just looked up how to do it right now, okay? Again, there's a time of vetting, there's a time of process, and there's a time to have things in your life. I wouldn't call someone your teacher who hasn't been doing this for a very amount of time at all, okay? Same thing. We're learning spiritually how physical things fall in our life, all right? Next point. You will only appreciate something you've made an investment in. Is that true? Consider people who have been given everything. Do they appreciate it? No, not really. And I know this is a general term, and there's always exceptions to the rule, okay? But as a general statement, if someone's just been given everything, do they appreciate what they have? No, not really. Let me consider this. How many of you were given a car? How many of you worked for your car? How many of you were given a car, then you had to work for a car? Did you treat it differently? Yes, you did, because that's part of life. When you make an investment in something, you realize its value. Okay? And so what the Father is asking us to do is to make an investment in your life in Him. And we do that by reading. Reading the Scripture. We do that by relationship, by community, by learning from one another, and just day by day learning to walk these things out. When the Father is asking us to get to His Torah, He's learning us. That's good English. He's teaching us to learn from Him. Okay, how many of you guys had a late night last night? I'm just asking for a little grace. I'll make a deal with you. I'll give it if I get it, all right? It's good to have fun. We all need a laugh. But what the Father is wanting us to do is to daily make an investment in what He wants us to be. So He's teaching us His ways, teaching us what He desires for us, teaching us essentially at the core of it is His heart. Teaching us what He desires. And if we're learning to follow His ways, it's going to benefit more than anything else. Okay? We read in the Scripture, Exodus 35:29, so all the men and the women of the people of Israel whose heart moved them brought anything to the work that Yahweh had commanded. Matthew 16:24, Yeshua says to His disciples, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. Sometimes there's just a bigger price to pay for something more important. And so when you make an investment, you appreciate it. See? And so we can understand. What did your salvation cost you? Salvation was free. It was a gift that was given to you. Don't take it for granted. See, what He's asking us to do with it is learn how to walk in it. Learning how to walk in His ways and that which He has given us. And that's what He was telling Aaron and his sons as well. Because, again, the closer you get to the tabernacle, the closer you get to the temple, this is something we continually learn, the closer you get to that place, the more responsibility there was on you. It's not saying you have a better relationship with Yahweh than anyone else in Israel. It's just there was more responsibility on you because you were closer to that place. You had to learn the importance of clean, unclean, and holy and common and what it meant. Why? Because you were in proximity of his presence. And then, today we're like, well, we don't need to know that because we don't have a temple or a tabernacle, but you are the temple. So in my mind, that's scary. Because it's not that, we don't need to know this because we don't have a temple. If you are the temple, then that should be that much more accountability. And so, again, how do we present our lives and ourselves to the Father? And that's what we're looking at. And that's, again, tying it in with unleavened bread. That's what we're looking at in this time. Right? We're willing to search ourselves to find the Father's heart. Right? Okay. Leviticus 10:3. Moshe says to Aaron, this is what the Lord has said. I will be sanctified in them that come nigh to me, and before all the people I will be glorified. And Aaron held his peace. Think about when this was said. This was said after Aaron just lost his 2 boys, right? Nadav and Avihu. Why? Because they brought strange fire to Yahweh. It says fire came out from before the Lord and consumed them. We're not really getting into that today, but again, this was Aaron's sons, and Yahweh is telling them, to those who are closest to him, he will be sanctified and glorified. Meaning, if those who are supposed to be the closest to me do not respect me and honor me, how will the people? See, so again, we who belong to Yahweh have a responsibility to represent him to those around us. Why? Because like it or not, right or not, wrong or not, people look at you and judge the God you serve based on you. Right, wrong, whatever, it's a fact. So what kind of people do we need to be? We need to be people who show the Father's heart and who exhibit his character in our lives, right? Okay, how do we do these things? Keep moving. Leviticus 10:8-11. So Yahweh spoke to Aaron, saying, do not drink wine or strong drink, you or your sons, when you go into the tabernacle of congregation, lest you die, for it is a statute forever throughout your generations. Why? So that they don't make a mistake right there in his presence, right? And that you may put a difference between holy and unholy, and between unclean and clean. And then what's verse 11 say? And that you may teach the children of Israel all the statutes which the Lord has said to them by the hand of Moses. So what happens if we're not taught? What happens if we don't know the differences between clean and holy and common? Well, at the very least of it, we won't know how to put a difference between it. If we don't know what it is, we won't know how to discern. So what the Father is teaching us is how to discern. And not just how to discern his word, but how to discern life. How to discern the things around us, right? Because, almost right is still wrong. and there's a lot of wiggle room in here, guys. There honestly is, because even in the straight road and the straight path, there's still room. I mean, if this is the path, and here we are, and we're right here in the middle of it, we're still on the path. If we're here, we're still on the path. Okay? We're just not to go off the path. So we've got to learn how to walk together at this. All right? Okay. Is it still important? How many of you have heard, but because Yeshua came, he did away with these things. We don't have to worry about the food issue anymore, right? We'll cover that in a minute. But is it still important? Okay, well, let's look at this. Isaiah 52 says, depart, go out from there, don't touch the unclean thing, go out of the midst, be clean, you who bear the vessels of Yahweh. And you might say, okay, but that's the Old Testament. But then why do we look at Corinthians then, where it says, therefore, go out from their midst, be separate to them, says the Lord, touch no unclean thing, and I will welcome you. So this was what Paul was writing to Corinthians, right? Which, by the way, was after Yeshua, death, burial, and resurrection. So why is it still an issue? Why is it still important? Because it is. Look, 1 Thessalonians 4:7. For God has not called us to uncleanness, but to what? Holiness. So there is a connection between unclean and unholy. There is a connection between clean and holy. Now, don't get me wrong. I am not saying that by doing this, you're making yourself more holy, because quite honestly, there's nothing you can do to make yourself more holy. See, he is the one who makes you holy, not you. But we have to learn to walk this way so that we don't become defiled. Because defiling was contaminating, isn't it? All right? And we see also in Ephesians 5, where it says, for this you know, that no whoremonger, nor unclean person, nor covetous man, or is an idolater, has any inheritance of the kingdom of Christ and of God. Let no man deceive you with vain words, because of these things comes the wrath of God upon the children of disobedience. So again, we're looking at unclean and disobedience and how these things tie together. Okay, there is a connection. What about the New Jerusalem? Right? You want to talk New Testament? Okay, let's go there. Okay? Revelation 21:27. And there was in no wise enter in anything, what? Unclean, or he that makes an abomination of the lie, but only they that are written in the Lamb's book of life. So we see unclean issues with the temple was an issue. So because the temple's gone, is it still an issue? Yeah, sure. Because we even see in times yet to be, it's still an issue. Why? Because the issue wasn't just about the temple. The issue was your heart. The issue was you. The issue was you are a holy people. And that didn't change. Okay? So, a couple things we learned. In the Torah, the very center of the Torah, right? 5 books, right? What's the middle book? Vayikra, Leviticus, which is talking about be holy. So if we look at the center of the Torah, if we count the letters, the center of the Torah is in Leviticus 11:42. Where it says, whatever moves in its stomach or goes on all fours, that has many legs, all creatures that swarm upon the ground, you are not to eat them because they are a detestable thing. This word is gahon. Gahon is the word that's used there. And if you look, you can see there's a letter vav. That is the very center mark in the Torah, counted by letters. And isn't it interesting that at the very center, or if you want to use this terminology, at the very heart of the Torah, we find a vav, which represents man, and we find an issue of that which dwells on its belly, and then we're talking about food. What is to be eaten, what is not to be eaten. Interesting? Does God care? Yeah, he does. Okay? So, this was also used in Genesis 3:14 concerning the serpent crawling on its belly. But this is the only 2 times in the Torah this word is used. Interesting? Again, just consider the connections, right? Okay, Leviticus 11:43. It says, you are not to make yourselves detestable with any of these swarming creatures. Do not make yourselves unclean with them. Do not defile yourselves with them. I want to clarify as well, did God say these things are evil? No, they're not evil. They're doing what they were created to do. Everything that Yah created has a purpose, right? I mean, we can even look around us and we see how the ecosystem, even here in Florida, consider the world now. You know, Yahweh put things in certain areas for certain things so that the earth can flourish and function and so that it does what it's created to do, okay? So it's not evil, but Yahweh says, I don't want you to eat it. Okay? So that's the issue we're looking at. Verse 44. For I am Adonai your God. Oh, there we go again. How many times does he say that? A lot. You know why? I got a lot of answers on that, and they're all right. Like, because he meant it, because it's true, because he said so, because we forget. I mean, yeah, because we're not. Yeah, that's a good one. You know, he is God, we ain't, right? So there are some things that we need to consider for no other reason he is our God. Okay? Much like the very first of all the 10 Commandments, I am the Lord your God who brought you out. So the very first of anything is relationship. It's not doing something to try to get in his good graces. Wrong. It doesn't work. What he wants us to do is just be obedient because we belong to him. Because we're in relationship with him, he wants us to walk with him. Okay? If we choose another path and go another way, he's still walking on the road. We got to get back on the road with him. Okay? All right. So where am I at now? Verse 44. I am Adonai your God, therefore consecrate yourselves and be holy, for I am holy. Do not defile yourselves with any kind of swarming creature or thing moves on the ground. For I am Adonai who brought you up out of the land of Egypt to be your God. Therefore you are to be holy because I am holy. So you are to be holy, why? Because he is holy, and it's this relationship. We're to be with him, so he wants us to be holy. Why? Because he is. Okay, let's keep going. Verse 46. So such then is the law concerning animals, flying creatures, all living creatures that move about in the water, and all creatures that swarm on the ground. Its purpose is, there's a purpose to it. What does it say? Its purpose is to distinguish between the unclean and the clean. Why to know the difference between the unclean and the clean? Because the clean animals could be used for certain offerings and certain things that were given, right? So, and the unclean, and between the creatures that may be eaten and those that may not be eaten. There's a difference, things to learn here, okay? So again, we're talking about the issues of clean, unclean, holy, common, and this is by no means an exhaustive teaching to cover every scripture that talks about it, but, how did Noah know what was clean? Someone had to have told him. Who was it? And so we have that. He had to know what was clean because God says, take this many clean animals, this many unclean, right? If he didn't know what it was, he would have just been guessing. And that's not what Yah wanted. Matter of fact, that's not what he does in our life as well. Okay? Talking about Romans, talking about the things that are eaten, to eat the things that are unclean, well, that's actually common. It's not about can you eat pork now, it's about eating food that has been defiled or offered to idols. That's what was being talked about in Romans. Cover a little more of that later. But like I said, there's a lot of ground you can cover in here. We're not going to get to it all today. All right? So first off, how do you know what is clean and unclean? You're given signs. You're to look for things, right? What are you to look for? So for the animals, there's two things, two witnesses. What is it? Completely split hoofs and chew its cud. Yeah, but what if it only two things? We try to make it more difficult, don't we? We're good at that. Yah said it's only two things. It's the animals, there's only two things you have to take a look at. Okay, completely split hooves. What if it's half split? We're good at half splitting hairs, aren't we? Two witnesses, two things to do there, all right? What about fish? Fins and scales. So if it's in the water and it doesn't have fins and scales, don't eat it. Is that hard? Scales are scales. Fish are fish. Right? Birds. The non-kosher name ones are named, so the unclean ones are named. So what if they're not on the list? We make it harder. Okay. Here's the one everybody has fun with. Insects. Ooh, man. Yeah, I know, right? So flying, teeming, walk on four legs, and they have jumping legs. Things like a cricket, grasshopper, locust. There's a lot of protein in locusts, so I've heard. I cannot testify firsthand. What about chocolate-covered ants? Does it fit? No. No. Okay. So again, just things we make. So we're just given a couple things, right? And what's the underlying issue of it all? Yahweh says, he doesn't say these things are detestable. He said eating it is detestable. He didn't say they're evil. He said, I don't want you to eat it. They have a purpose, right? And so what the Father is saying is that there are things that we can do that can bring a defilement to us and within us. And he wants us to remain a people that are clean because we are to be bearers of his presence, right? Okay, so clean and unclean. Unclean is not always sin. Is that true? That's true. It is not a guilt or punishment. Because let me put this by you. If you touched blood, what are you? You're unclean, at least till sundown. You make for sundown, then you're clean again, right? If you touch the dead body, it's 7 days. There are certain times and things that all fit criteria, okay? So being unclean doesn't mean you sinned. It just means you're unclean, right? So again, not all unclean is sin, but all sin is unclean. Okay? Make sense? All right. It is a ritual state of being. Like example, if you brought an offering, you had to be in a state of ritually clean. To be unclean was not a sin, but it was a defilement. However, if you were defiled and you went into the presence of Yahweh, you would die. See, because to be unclean wasn't a sin, but then if you were to approach him in that manner, then you are desecrating or his holy place. And he says you're not to defile my sanctuary that is in your midst. Okay, a couple of things we're learning there. So all the more reason we need a korban. All the more reason why we need to be brought into the presence of Yahweh. And guys, that's what Yeshua did for us. Yeshua brought us into the presence of Yahweh, and we can't forget that. Okay? But because he brought us into the presence of Yahweh, why would we say, because I am now in the presence of Yahweh, now I can do whatever defiling, detestable, unclean thing I want? No. Because we're in his presence, how much more do we want to remain there? Okay, so we need to be with him in all this. All right? So now we are told that we need to discern ourselves and our surroundings. Why? In order to do that, we are told what is clean and unclean in regards to what we eat, and we are taught how to biblically discern by learning how to discern and make distinctions in the natural. Remember here, food is a clean, unclean issue. Okay? All right. So what is the real issue? Defiling ourselves, then coming into the presence of Yahweh. Okay? Now, does that mean if we've sinned or we've messed up that now we can't come into his presence? No. What it means is now we have to repent so that we can come in his presence. It doesn't mean we can continue doing whatever. Right? It's like I said, you can't make yourself better to come into his presence. Only he's the one that can clean you up. Right? But we've got to repent to be able to come in there and to do that. Leviticus 15:31 says, in this way you will do what? Separate the people of Israel from their uncleanness. Why? So that they will not die in their state of uncleanness for defiling my tabernacle, which is there with them. So how much more for defiling the tabernacle that is within them? Okay? 2 Corinthians 6:16 and 17 says, what agreement can there be between the temple of God and that of idols? For we are the temple of the living God. As said, I will house myself in them, I will walk among you, I will be their God, they will be my people. Therefore, Adonai says, go out from their midst, separate yourselves, don't touch what is unclean, and then I will receive you. We said those before, as quoting from Isaiah, right? Leviticus 11:45. For I am Adonai who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. Why? To be your God. And so therefore, you are to be holy because I am holy. Leviticus 19:2. Speak to the entire community of Israel and tell them, you people are to be holy because I, Adonai, your God, am holy. So what are we talking about relationship? We're talking about people coming into his presence. We're talking about new things coming in here, right? Well, let's talk about the Acts 15 council for a second. Because this was addressed here. You never know that it came about where they started talking about food? Look, the question was, what do we tell the Gentiles who are coming to faith concerning circumcision? Which would mean what at the time? Understanding when they say that we have to circumcise them, it was not just a physical act, okay? Before they would circumcise them, they had to learn what it meant to have that done. In other words, let me kind of put it in this terminology. Before you can come into our membership role, you have to go to our new converts class. You have to learn our doctrines. You have to learn to think the way we think, do things the way we do them, then you can come in and be a member. And all that would fall in the same way of saying to circumcise them. So is that what God was saying? No. Matter of fact, when was Abraham circumcised? See, when Yah met Abraham, he wasn't. So again, is that the issue? No, not really. So what we're talking about here is a conversion to Judaism, and what they're saying is you have to be a Jew to serve God. Is that true? No. Okay, but that was the issue of the day. That's what was being said. Okay. Acts 15:1. But some men came down from Yehuda and Antioch and began teaching the brothers, you can't be saved unless you undergo the Brit Milah, the circumcision, and the manner prescribed by Moshe. But some of those who had come to trust were from the party of the Pershim, the Pharisees, and they stood up and they said, it is necessary to circumcise them and direct them to observe Torah. So what was going on? What was happening? Well, James is the one who stood up and kind of said, okay, here's what we're going to do. Okay? Why would James know anything about that? James, if you want to put it this way, the half-brother of Yeshua, he grew up with him. I think he would know a little bit about what he would think of the matter, right? Okay. What did he say? Acts 15:19. Therefore, my opinion is that we should not put obstacles in the way of the Goyim, the nations who are turning to God, but instead we should write them a letter telling them to what? Okay, so let's look at it. 1, to abstain from things polluted from idols. What does that mean? That means defilement. What things would be given to idols? What things would be polluted for idols? The offerings. Does it matter what kind of thing it was? No. Does it matter if it was a lamb? Does it matter if it was a cow? Does it matter if it was, a sheep or a goat or a pig or whatever? It was offered to an idol. Doesn't matter. We're not talking about clean or unclean. We're talking about idolatry. Okay? Next, from fornication, which is sexual immorality, and from things strangled, that's a kosher issue. Okay, because even it says don't eat the blood, right? That's a kosher issue. In order for the meat to be proper, it had to be properly slain. All right? Then, and from blood, because the blood, what does the scripture say? The blood is given to make atonement on the altar, right? So again, we're talking about these 4 things that were given to them, and it's funny how a couple of them are dealing with kosher, right? Then the next thing says, verse 21, for from the earliest times Moshe has had in every city those who proclaim with him his words being read in the synagogues every Shabbat. So what is he telling them to do? Go to the synagogue on Shabbat to hear the Torah taught. People ask us, why do you go through the Torah? Why do you teach the Torah? Why do you do this? Well, because we're told to. We're supposed to, right? Even Yeshua, when he went to the synagogue on Shabbat, which he did do, what did he read? Right? They read from the Torah, and they talked about it. They discussed it. So again, we learn to walk with him, and then we learn week by week how we're to do these things. Now, if the apostles had no concern for dietary things, in other words, if they didn't care, then they would not have had a concern for how food was handled. Is that true? Okay. James said, stay away from things strangled. Peter said that he had never, what's the word? Never, which means never, okay? I have never eaten anything considered unclean. Let me ask you a question. How many meals do you think he ate with Yeshua? Yeah, once or twice. And consider this as well. When people always talk about, Paul confronting Peter because he was eating with the Gentiles. Did it say what they were eating? No. So was he eating something that would have been unclean? No. Right? Because that's not what he said. Peter says, I've never eaten anything unclean. This is in Acts 15, which, by the way, is after Acts 10, if I'm not, I could be mistaken. But is it 15 after 10? Look, Leviticus 11:45. I am Yahweh that brought you up out of the land of Egypt to be your God. Therefore, you shall be holy. Why? Because I am holy. All right, we see this. Continuing on, Leviticus 11:43-47, to go to verse 46. Such then is the law concerning animals, flying creatures, all living creatures that move about in the water, and all creatures that swarm on the ground. Its purpose is, again, what? To distinguish between the unclean and the clean, and between the creatures that may be eaten and may not be eaten. So what was Peter's vision about? In Acts chapter 10, what was Peter's vision about? Peter was staying with some people out by the seashore, a tanner. Won't go into those details, but let's just say it smelled. And he was up on the roof. Probably get a better breeze up there. And what was he doing? thinking. And it says he started to get hungry. And he kind of fell into a trance. He had like an open vision kind of thing, right? So what happened? Let's look at it really quick. Acts 10:10. So he began to feel hungry, and he wanted something to eat. But while they were preparing the meal, he fell into a trance, in which he saw heaven open, and something that looked like a large sheet being lowered to the ground by its four corners. Some say it was a tallit. In it were all kinds of four-footed animals, crawling creatures, and wild birds. And a voice came to him, "Get up, Kepha, slaughter and eat." Peter, get up, kill and eat. Verse 14. But Kepha says, "No, sir, absolutely not. I have never eaten food that was unclean or trife." So God says, "Peter, I want you to get up, kill and eat. You're hungry, go ahead and do it." And he says, "No," to God. I mean, seriously, think about it. And the voice spoke to him a second time, "Stop treating as unclean what God has made clean." So does it say, I've made the animals clean? There's no longer. Does it say that? No. Verse 16, this happened 3 times, and then the sheet was immediately taken back up to heaven. So Kepha was doing what? Still puzzling. He's still trying to figure out, what in the world does that mean? I don't know what to do with that. Right? He was still puzzling over the meaning of this vision that he had seen when Cornelius, having inquired for Shimon's house, they stood at the gate. Cornelius was a Gentile who was a God-fearer. And God told him, an angel appeared to him and says, "I want you to go find Peter and bring him here, and he'll talk to you, and he'll help you." Okay? And so he sends these men. So would it be okay for Peter to go with these Gentile men, these centurions, to go to a home of a Gentile? Considered by many, no. Because would a Gentile be keeping clean? No. Okay. So while Kepha's mind was still on the vision, the Spirit said, 3 men are looking for you. So get up, go downstairs, and have no misgivings about going with them, because I myself have sent them. Why would he have misgivings about going with them? Because they're unclean. So he would think. Right? Acts 10:28. So he said to them, "Who is speaking?" Peter. So Peter himself, he's trying to figure out what this vision was, and then Peter tells these men, "So you are well aware that for a man who is a Jew to have close association with someone who belongs to another people, or to come to visit them, is something that just isn't done. But what? God has shown me that I can eat whatever I want." No! What did Peter say the vision meant? God has shown me not to call any person common or unclean. Notice common or unclean. Okay? So then Kepha addressed them. "I now understand God does not play favorites, but whosoever fears him and does what is right and acceptable to him, no matter what people he belongs to." So what was the meaning of the vision? Don't judge people. They're saying they're unclean if God has cleansed them. You don't know that. Okay? If they're saying, that they want to serve God, help them. And this is what Peter was supposed to do. So a Jew did not eat with a Gentile. Why? Because this was not an issue of eating a steak or ham, by the way. This was not an issue of what the meat was. This was an issue of they themselves. This was an issue of idolatry, and that they were not to have fellowship with idolaters or pagan practices. If an unclean person touched permissible food, what happened to the food that was clean? It became unclean. Okay? Let me ask you this. If you get some food and you drop it on the floor, same scenario. Okay? You're like, "Well, I don't want to eat that now." Right? So if food was mishandled, it would be considered common. And the issue was never, pork is now kosher. I'll put it to you this way. Yeshua did not suffer, die, was buried, and resurrected so that we could have him. never a point. Look, this is one of the same issues that was taken to Yeshua. The issues of being unclean is the issue that we're looking at. Okay? Remember that people came to him regarding eating with unclean hands, eating with unwashed hands. Now, let me just kind of throw this out there. It's a good idea to wash your hands before you eat. Okay? Matter of fact, I implore you to do so. Okay? Wash your hands. But is that what was being addressed? It wasn't really even about washing the hands. It was about they were not considered to be proper unless it was done with a certain ritual, with certain blessings, done a certain way. You could have washed your hands, but they would not have considered it so. Okay? Look. If a man had touched something that was unclean, what happened to it? Became unclean. And everything he touched became unclean. So if he touched permissible food with unclean hands, it is unclean. Let's take a look at it. Mark 7. So the Parashim, the Pharisees, and some of the Torah teachers who had come from Yerushalayim gathered together with Yeshua, and they saw that some of his Talmidim ate with ritually unclean hands, that is, without doing the Netilat Yadayim. So does it say what they were eating? No. They just noticed that they didn't do the ritual hand washing before they ate. So for verse 3, for the Parashim indeed and all the Judeans holding fast to the tradition of the elders do not eat unless they have given their hands to ceremonial washing. Verse 4. Also, when they come from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they have rinsed their hands up to the wrist, and they adhere to many other traditions, such as the washing of the cups and the pots, the bronze vessels. Like I said, nothing wrong with that. Please do so. But again, we're talking the ritual behind it, not just the actual thing. Verse 5, so the Parashim and the Torah teachers asked them, why don't your Talmidim live in accordance with the tradition of the elders, but instead eat with ritually unclean hands? Do you know what the actual question is? It's not about what they're eating, is it? It's about the ritually unclean hands and the washing. So that's what we're looking at. Verse 6, so Yeshua answered, Yeshayahu was right when he prophesied about you hypocrites, as it is written, these people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. Verse 7. Their worship of me is useless because they teach man-made rules as if they were doctrines. So you depart from God's command and hold on to human tradition. Indeed, he said to them, you have made a fine art of departing from God's commands in order to keep tradition. Go down to verse 14. So then Yeshua called the people to him again, and he said, listen to me, all you, and understand this. There's nothing outside a person which by going into him can make him unclean. Rather, it is the things that come out of a person which make a person unclean. Anyone who has ears to hear, let him hear. So when he had left the people, entered into the house, his Talmidim asked him about the parable. So again, what are we talking about? Are we talking about what was being eaten, whether if it was clean or unclean? Was it food? Was it not food? Is this the issue? No, because that's not what was being talked about. That's not what Yeshua was answering. So when he says it's not what goes into a person that makes them unclean, was it about what they were eating? No. Verse 18. So he said to them, so you too are without understanding. Don't you see that nothing going into a person from outside can make him unclean? But it doesn't go into his heart, but into his stomach, and passes out into the latrine. Hello? And then it says, thus he declared all foods ritually clean, which, by the way, that little phrase is not in the early texts. So it is what comes out of a person, he went on, that makes him unclean. So again, the side note on verse 19, where it says purging all the meats, purging all the foods, where it says it goes out, right? Again, the word that's used here, if you look in the King James, right, the text that's being used, the word there is broma. Broma. So what is the definition of broma? The word that's used there for food. The definition of the word used there for food is that which is considered according to Jewish law. Think about that for a second. The definition of what is food, according to the Greek, is that which the Jews say is food. So is it really about what they were eating? Again, really consider. Mark 7:21. So for from within, out of a person's heart, come forth wicked thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, indecency, envy, slander, arrogance, foolishness. All these wicked things are done from within. They make a person unclean. So again, it's the issues of the heart that overflows and the things that we do that we're talking about being unclean, right? What about, so continuing along the line of the food and what we're eating, what about Daniel? You know, many people say, well, I'm going to do a Daniel fast, and they have no idea what that is or why he was doing it. Right? Here's something else to look at. Why was Daniel say that he would abstain from eating meat? It wasn't just meat, it was the king's meat. There's a reason there, okay? If you look at it, Daniel 1:8, it says, Daniel resolved that he would not do what? Defile himself with the king's food or wine. Why would that matter? Not just the king's meat, but the wine. And so he asked the chief officer to be excused from defiling himself. Daniel 1:12. So please try an experiment on your servants. For 10 days, give us only vegetables to eat and water to drink. Why? Why do we say just give us the vegetables? Because those would not have been offered to an idol. Daniel 1:16. So the guard took away their food and the wine that they were supposed to drink, and he gave them vegetables. So again, the king's food was offered to idols. So it was common. It didn't say what the food was. It could have been something that was permissible, but it was offered to an idol. It's just the way it functioned. Okay? So it would have been considered common. The first of the wine would be poured out as a drink offering to an idol or a god. So again, what happens if the first was poured out to an idol or to a deity? Then that would be offered to do so. You don't partake of the rest of it, right? Same thing. This was even the case in the markets in the first century. It's not about what was it. You could go here and buy a lamb from someone who was certified, they're doing it right. And then go over here, just someone from the nations who you don't know who they are, you don't know what they're doing, and they don't serve God. It could be the same thing. They could both have a lamb, but maybe he's offering it up to an idol. That was the issue. Okay? We're talking about idolatry, things that are called common. Exodus 34:12. Be careful not to make a covenant with the people living in the land where you're going, so that they won't become a snare within your own borders. Rather, you are to demolish their altars, smash their standing stones, and cut down their sacred poles, because you are not to bow down to any other god, since Adonai, whose very name is a jealous God. Verse 15. Do not make a covenant with the people living in the land. It will cause you to do what? Go astray after their gods and sacrifice to their gods, and then they will invite you in eating their sacrifices. So the whole idea of not going in there is so that you don't end up in idolatry, serving the other gods, doing these things, and being caught up in these things that God says don't do. Right? Does Yeshua care? Yeah. Yeah, he does. Look. Revelation. Chapter 2, verses 12 to 14. To the angel of the community of Pergamum write, here is the message from the one who has a sharp double-edged sword. I know where you're living, and that their adversary's throne is, yet you are holding on to my name. You did not deny trusting me, even at the time when the faithful witness Antipas was put to death in your town, where this is where your adversary lives. Nevertheless, I have a few things against you. You have some people who hold to the teaching of Balaam. What was the teaching of Balaam? Who taught Balak to set a trap before the people of Israel so that they would eat food that has been sacrificed to idols and commit sexual sin. To eat food that was given to idols? To eat food that was slaughtered in the name of a different god? Revelation 2:18. To the angel of the community in Thyatira write, here is the message from the Son of God, whose eyes are like a fiery flame, whose feet are like burnished brass. I know what you're doing, your love, trust, service, and perseverance, and I know what you're doing more now than ever. Verse 20. But I have this against you. You continue to tolerate the Jezebel woman, the one who claiming to be a prophet, but is teaching and deceiving, who? My servants, to commit sexual sin and eat food sacrificed to idols. Is this an issue of what kind of animal it is? No. It was an issue of idolatry or not. 1 Corinthians 10:18-21. So look at the physical Israel. Don't those who eat the sacrifices participate in the altar? Remember, we're going through Vayikra, Leviticus, and remember there are offerings that you brought that was considered the table of Yah, and you got portions of that back for certain offerings, right? You are partaking from his table. Would it be considered the same for idols? Okay. So look at physical Israel. Don't you know that those who eat the sacrifices, they participate in the altar? So what am I saying? That food sacrificed to idols has any significance in itself, or that the idol has significance in itself? No. What I'm saying is that the things which the pagans sacrifice, they sacrifice not to God, but to demons. And I don't want you to become sharers of demons. Know what God said? I don't want you to do the things that the nations are doing to their gods, right? Verse 21. You can't drink a cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. You can't partake in both the meal of the Lord and the meal of demons. This ties in line with you have one master. You know, you either do what he says or you don't. Now, again, thank God when we mess up, we have an advocate to help go before us and help bring us back into the heart of the Father, because we need that, okay? But it doesn't mean that we don't try. Right? Look, 1 Peter 1:15. On the contrary, following the Holy One who called you, become holy yourselves in your entire way of life, since the Tanakh says you are to be holy because I am holy. 1 Peter 2:5, you also as lively stones, living stones, are built up as a spiritual house, a holy priesthood, to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God in Messiah Yeshua. And 1 Peter 2:9, you are a chosen people, the king's Kohanim, a holy nation, a people for God to possess. Why? In order for you to declare the praises of the one who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Amen? The things that the Father is asking us to do is nothing more than to walk with him. Learn his ways, learn his heart, so that we can be where he goes. It would be much related to the idea of the pillar and the cloud as God is leading Israel through the wilderness. They had to follow him. Our pillar of fire, our cloud, is the Word. This is what the Father's given us for us to follow. We got to read it, and we got to follow. Why? Because you are a people called out. You are a holy people. You are a people to bear his presence and to carry him with you wherever you go. Do it. And do it with joy. Amen?